Okay, welcome back. We've got more on our R7 build for you. This time we're actually going to build a motor for the bike. We want to up the boost on this bike and make as much power as we can. And the factory motor is just not up to the task. It's fine, 7 or 8 pounds of boost. It will live a long, happy life. When you start pushing up 10, 12, 13, 14 pounds of boost, you'll start breaking things. They're not designed to run more than twice the factory power. So one of the weak points in these motors is the factory conrods. So luckily Carrillo makes an off-the-shelf forged H-beam rod for them, which we're going to use. We're going to use factory stock OEM pistons that we've had ceramic coated. So these are a factory forged piston, and we've had the tops of them ceramic coated, and the skirts of them, it's like got a Teflon type coating that holds oil on the skirts. The ceramic coating on top just stops a lot of the heat transfer out of the cylinder into the piston, and it just makes them live longer and at higher boost levels. Then we were also going to use some ARP head studs, and that helps to clamp the cylinder head to the barrels when there's more cylinder pressure in there. Heavy duty valve springs in. Again, at 7 or 8 pounds of boost, the standard valve springs are fine. When you start pushing up over 10 pounds, the valves have to push closed against the boost pressure. And so they need a bit of help. They just need to be stronger. So we've got some heavier valve springs going in. When you build one of these motors, you need to replace gaskets. Obviously, we've got a stock OEM head gasket and a clutch cover gasket and a stator cover gasket. We're also, this motor that we've bought, so this motor is actually an MT-07 engine. The reason we're building an MT-07 engine and not the R7 engine is that the engine in this bike it's basically brand new, and I don't want to pull a brand new motor apart to upgrade. This one we bought online, and it's apparently got 7,000 or 8,000 Ks on it. We've got it at a good price. I really want to start pushing the turbo kit to its limits and seeing how much power we can make. If I break this motor, it's not such a big deal. The only difference between an MT-07 and an R7 is the clutch. So the MT-07 uses the traditional style 6-spring clutch, whereas the R7 and the 21 model onwards MT-07 also use a slipper helper type clutch. What this does is under acceleration, the clutch ramps, pulls together and helps clamp the clutch pack. On deceleration, it actually unloads the clutch. It's just a newer style clutch, and we want to keep everything the same as what is in the R7. We've got a brand new Yamaha clutch kit to put in it, fibers and steels. And the other thing we're going to upgrade is the injectors. So we've got a set of MT-09 injectors. These are just stock MT-09 injectors from the up to 20 model. They're physically the same size as an R7, and they take the same connectors and everything. They just flow 40% more. The stock injectors are good up for 7, 8 pounds of boost again, but they're pretty much maxed out at that. When you want to start pushing more boost, you need more fuel flow. And so we upgrade to the MT-09 injectors. The reason I've got the covers off this is because the MT-07 has those sort of bronzy looking covers, and we've just taken the covers off and had them blasted and ceramic coated into more of a grey colour, which is more like the R7. We're going to pull the motor apart. I'll set up the cameras and we'll do a bit of a time lapse. And then when we get the thing pulled down, we'll have a look at the parts that we're installing, and we'll have a bit more of a discussion then.
Have faith. Have faith. Believe in your source. Have faith. Have faith. Have faith. Believe in your source. Have faith.
So I'm actually really impressed with how the motor looks inside. I was told it had about 8,000 Ks on it, but I guess it's a gamble that you take buying a second-hand motor. Being that this was a Lamb's engine, it looks like it. I mean, it looks like it's had a very easy life, if it's even done that many Ks. So yeah, I'm very happy. All the gear dogs on the gears just look like brand new. There's not even a mark on them. The bearings are excellent. There's a couple of little scuff marks on them, but it's what you expect of an engine that's been run. So yeah, I've got bearings that I could put in it, but I think I'm just going to put it back the way it is. The crank's perfect. The rods, I mean, I could reuse these pistons. They're a bit grubby from just having a bit of build-up on the tops of them, but I could clean that and reuse them. But I've got the ceramic coated pistons, so I'm gonna replace the pistons. I think I'll reuse the rings. They've still got, you know, plenty of tension. I'm going to gap them out anyway. So yeah, I'll reuse the rings. You can see that these rods are very, very thin rods, and they're just like a cast rod. They're not very. Actually, I'll show you a Carrillo rod. That is, you can see the difference. Like that is the standard rod, and you know, you can see the difference with the Carrillos. It's a much stronger rod, and they're very similar, if not the same, in weight. So I'll actually weigh them and check that. But yeah, you don't need to rebalance the crank in these if you use these rods, which is very handy. Okay, so I'll give everything a bit of a clean, and then I'll fit the new pistons to the Carrillos, and we'll gap those rings out, fit the rings. I'll just check once we put it back together, I'll check the bearing clearances on the crank in the Carrillo rods, make sure everything's still good. And then yeah, I'm gonna put it back together. I have bearings for this motor, but I'm not even gonna waste the time putting them in, because the ones that are in there are you know, completely serviceable. And there's no reason to just throw money at it for no reason. I want to show you that it could be a budget build if you wanted to. All right, let's start putting things back together. So I'm going to start by pulling this piston assembly apart with just popping that circlip out of the piston there. These rings, when you put rings on there, they are directional. I'm going to have all the tops of the rings facing up. The second ring is a different color. It's made of a different material to the top ring. You can't really, I mean, you can't see it, but there's a little mark on the top there that denotes that it is the top of the ring. And then the oil control ring, which is actually a three separate pieces. There's two very thin parts, rings, and then a serrated, if you like, inner part that holds the oil. So now we've got that pin out, that clip out. We can push the pin out and separate the piston from the conrod. I also want to take out the bearings, because I want to weigh this and compare it to the Carrillo rod. So the Carrillo rod has no bearing in it at the moment. I'm also going to make sure that I keep the bearings orientated exactly how they were on this rod. So the front of the rod I've got pointing away from me, the bearing there, and the rod half of the bearing like that. So I'll zero that. We've got 336.5 grams is the factory rod, and the Carrillo is 336.6. So they're, you know, identical, as close to identical as you want it to be. You need to have the rods the same weights, especially in this type of motor, because they're like an offbeat design. They're not it's not one up, one down. They're at 90 degrees. I don't know if you can see this, but This is how Yamaha does it on these. This pin is facing out towards us. This pin is at 90 degrees. Instead of a normal twin, that pin would be, 180 degrees off from this pin. So it just gives it that type of note that it has, the engine note. And it also means that these engines need to have a balance shaft to take up the vibrations. You want to have your rods balanced, or the same, keep everything the same weight, as close to the same weight as possible. Okay, I will start putting a new pin on our new conrod. Give it a bit of a wipe. It's fresh out of the packet. When I reassemble this engine, I'm going to use a mineral oil as a brake-in oil. Even though we're still using the same bearings and everything, I want to use a mineral-based oil just for the initial startup and run, because it'll, when you put an engine back together, you're going to flush a bit of crap out of it. So you don't want to go straight to a synthetic oil, because I want to do an oil change fairly soon after running it. So I'm just going to put a bit of oil in a cup there. I want to just take this rod apart so we can take it apart and put the bearings in. These bolts in these Carrillos are already pre-lubed, and the caps on these are marked, so there's a stamp on one side and not on the other, so you know which direction to put the thing back together. Also, the rods themselves aren't directional, although I'm going to choose my direction based on how the bearing goes back in, because I want the bearing to go into the notch. There's a little notch there that locates the bearing, and on this bearing it's there, so I'm going to make that the front. So I might actually get a texter and mark this. We've got rod number 1, and I'm marking which direction is the front. Just going to give these pistons a rinse, because they are straight back from coating. Okay, I've just given these a rinse. Even though they've been coated and they should be clean, it's always good to just give everything a rinse with some, I use just wax and grease remover and compressed air. Just blew them off. Make sure that they're completely clean and dry. And now we can install one of the circlips first, because the circlips are a bit tricky to install. See if I can get my fat fingers out of it. There's a notch there and a notch there, and then there's like a little cutout here. So I aim the circlip down into those notches and push. I push the circlip down a bit into that area, and then using a little screwdriver, flick the edge of it down into the cutout. I'm going to need to push a pin through just to pop it up into the right position. You heard a click. So looking at that now, the circlip is seated in the groove all the way around the piston. Okay, so now we want to install the piston. Actually, I want to show you something before I go any further. This is another piston. This is a piston out of an HO model, and I want to show you the difference. I don't know if you can see here, but because this is a 2mm bigger piston, Yamaha wants to keep the weight the same so they don't have to rebalance the cranks. So the cranks and the rods are all the same between the HO and the Lambs models. But because this is a 2mm smaller piston, they have to make the weight of the piston the same as the HO. So they've done that by adding material in these pockets here. As you can, I don't know if you can see that, but these pockets are shallower than they are in the HO piston, and that's to just add a bit of weight to that smaller diameter piston. Well, that's actually good for a turbo application, because you're adding strength to your ring lands. It's not cut away as much back there, down there. Not, I mean, it's not a massive difference, but it's, you know, you've got more material here to draw heat away, and you know, it adds a bit of strength in the back of the rings there. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all using a Lamb's model for a turbo application. It may not make, you know, much difference, but in my eyes, I think that is, you know, it's definitely not a detriment. So on these pistons, there's, I don't know if you can see, there is a little circle. There's a little circle at the front of the piston there, and that is denotes the front of the piston. So we know that our rod is pointing to the front that way, so we want to assemble it that way. I'm going to get some fresh engine oil and just coat inside. Doesn't help having fat fingers, but coat the inside of the pin bores. I'm actually going to put a decent amount of oil on that pin, get oil into that pin bore, carefully assemble, you know, making sure that it's all nice and free. So that's our front, and that slips in all the way, nice and easy. We'll get another, the clip for the other side, and the same as before, just push it down into the groove. It's actually a bit of oil has made that clip in a lot easier. So that's all in the right position. While we're here, I'm going to just put these bearings back in. As you can see, there's no marking on that. That line, I don't know if you can see that, that's how they come. The bearings are like that standard. The front, so that lines up correctly. And again, on the cap side, you just got to line these little notches up with the notch in the cap. When it tightens down, it'll squeeze it in the right spot. So if you can see there's a T2. So I think there's a T1 on the top ring, so that you know that's the top ring, T1, this is T2, second ring, and then the oil rings. They're not directional, but I'm going to put them back the same way so that you can actually see the marks from where that oil, like the serrated ring, was on this side of that. So I'll just put them back the same way. I want to show the rings I'm going to reuse are serviceable by comparing to a brand new ring. So that's the second ring. As you can see, the end gap, identical. And the top ring, yeah, so standard they have a T on the top ring, and that is very close, within 0.5 millimeter of being the same tension as a brand new ring. So I will reuse those, save the fresh rings for the next time if we blow it up. Some of you may be wondering why, you know, rings are so cheap, why reuse? Their parts at the moment are hard to come by, so if I can save a few bucks and still have a set of rings in stock, then I'm all about it. Now we will gap the rings out, and I will just get the manual up and show you why and how far. So the reason that we gap the rings out is because on a turbo engine, the way the rings work is that they're held in by the cylinder, and there is a small end gap at the end of the ring. Now, when the engine heats up and when there's like cylinder pressure and heat getting transferred into the ring expands, and that gap becomes smaller to the point where it can actually touch. So what we do with on a turbo engine, because there's more heat and everything getting transferred into the rings, there's more chance of that ring butting up. Now the problem with it butting up is that it's held by the cylinder, so as the ring ends come together and butt up, it wants to do that and go and push sideways, and that can actually break the top of the piston off, and you get cracking, and you can start, you know, damaging the piston, and then everything goes bad. So what we do is we create a slightly larger gap so that there's less chance of that butting together. It does have a side effect. The side effect is that you get a little bit more blow by, meaning that the crankcase breather will breathe a bit more fumes out of it, but it's only a 2-cylinder engine. It's not like a V8. These don't breathe super, you know, a large amount anyway. But during normal running conditions, you may see a bit of fumes coming out of the breather, but that's just a, you know, a side effect of it. But yeah, we'll get the ring compressor set up. I mean, the ring grinder set up, sorry, and show you how we go about it. So what we've got here, I've just cleaned up one of the other pistons with a bit of Scotch-Brite and some Prepsol just to get all the muck off it, and we're going to use that to square the piston rings down in the bore. So when you're measuring end gap, you need to have the piston ring in the bore, like, so that it's nice and square, so you don't get any variation in the end gap. So I'm just going to measure number 2 top ring and see where it's at. And so what you do is just push the piston down into the bore until the say the back edge of it is even, and then we can use our feeler gauge to see where it's at. Now it's right on 0.25 millimeter, 10th thou. We're going to go to 0.35. So the spec was 0.25 was the maximum, and we're going to go out to 0.35 on the top ring. Now these top rings are made of a hard material, and but you just want to be careful when you grind them that you don't take too much off at a time. The ring needs to sit. This is just a cheap ring grinder that I've got, and there's videos on YouTube on how to use a ring grinder. They're all the same, so we're just going to grind one side of the ring and give it a few turns, and we'll just see how much material we've taken off that. Pop it down back into the bore, square it again. Yeah, 0.28. So just a little bit more to go. Now, and then I've got a little diamond file here, which I'm just going to use to take, I can feel there's a bit of a burr on it, so just knock that burr off a bit. Obviously you don't want any burrs, especially on the cylinder wall or in the piston, you know, in the piston ring groove. Let's just check that one more time. We're still not there. No, we're at 0.3. To be kind of delicate with these, like careful with these rings, that they aren't the thickest things in the world, and if you're rough with them, you can damage them. Okay, we're there. Perfect. So then we can move on to the second ring. So it's a lot softer. So we'll check what it is what the end gap in that is to begin with. It's about 0.4. So we're going to take the second ring out to 0.55. Again, just carefully. Okay, now we're going to put the rings onto the pistons. We'll start by doing the oil ring. I just like to use a bit of oil on all the rings when installing. The fresh engine oil, and we'll start with the spreader ring. When you install this, the ends need to butt up with each other, not overlap, and you've got to just take care of that when you put the top and bottom rings on it, the top and bottom
oil rings to make sure that they are holding it in the correct spot. Again, these are very delicate. The other thing to be aware of is that you don't want the three rings, like the three oil rings, to have their end gaps in the same position. You want them to spread them out around the piston. Second ring. Yeah, so you want to not twist the rings too much when you're installing them, and make sure that they're nice and free in the ring groove. I like to put one of the end gaps on one side and one on the other side, sorry. So it's not lining up with the exhaust or the inlet. They move around anyway, so checking the top ring has the chamfer facing up. Yes, which it does. Oh, should have put these glasses on before. I can actually see what I'm doing. I've struggled for so long. They're all moving correctly and freely. So we're ready to install the pistons into the bores. What we want to do is we've cleaned the cylinders out, and I just want to give them a bit of oil so that when the pistons go in, they lubricate the rings. Also going to put a little bit of oil on our pistons. You can get all kinds of different ring compressors, but I've just made up a simple alloy ring. I made this for the MT-09s, but luckily enough it's also the right size for a Lamb's MT-07, being that they're 78mm bore. So put that piston gently, work it down into the ring compressor until they're just poking out the bottom, till it's out the bottom, and then check that our orientation is correct. And now with just a smooth movement we can push our whole piston straight into the bore. Just work it down into the cylinder. Now we can flip the whole lot over and put our crank in. Take our rod caps off, and again with some clean engine oil in our bearings, we are just going to put our crankshaft back in position. Install the rod cap, carefully wind in our bolts. Again, plenty of oil on the bearings. These rod bolts were pre-lubed. Normally they do supply lube with the kit, like with the conrods, but there was plenty on there already, so I didn't bother adding any more. The next thing we need to do is torque the bolts to spec. It all spins freely, which is good. Now we can start putting the rest of the bottom end back together. On the end of the crank there's a little like pin punch mark right there, and when you put the balance shaft back in, it has to line up with that pin punch mark. So it's got a corresponding mark, a little pin punch on the end there. So those two have to point towards each other exactly. That means that the balance shaft is orientated correctly to the crank. Obviously I just put some oil on the bearings, put a bit more on there. Can put our gear box upper shaft or output shaft back in. It's got a little
a pin on the bearing there, if you can see that, and that has to line up, that has to sit in this little notch in the back of the case, and the two shift rods need to go into the two corresponding slots on the output shaft. So when everything is sitting correct, it should all be free and move freely. Sit down like that in position. So that's all the internal parts of the crankcase that we need to put back in to put the two halves back together. And now we'll put some sealant around the areas that it needs it around the case, and then we can put the two case halves together. I just apply it with my finger. I put a smear. You don't want to put too much because you don't want it all squirting inside the cases when you put the cases together. So just a smear around the outside. The cases are like machined flat, so they're a really nice fit together. So it doesn't need a lot, just an even coat. And you don't want to go too close to where the bearings are either, so just keep it around the outside, something like that. And then the last thing we want to do before we put the case halves together again is to just put a bit of oil on the bearings again on this side. You can even put a bit on the crank journals. Now we can flip this over and put the two halves back together. As you can see, it's not a difficult engine to build, and if you take your time, it's not a hard job. It's just you got to be patient when you do it. So it all just sits back together nicely. Now we can put all our bolts back in. You'll notice that there's bolts that have O-rings on them, and they are on the outside of the cases. They have these holes that have a chamfer in them. These are all the same length, so I'm going to put the dirty bolts on the outside again, and I'll put those clean ones on the inside. And then we have our crank main bolts. These are also all the same length. Well, once again, I'll put that dirty one on the outside, and that one. This larger 12mm bolt can go in there. Supports the output shaft. And there's another one on the back side of that. There's a one with a shoulder that also goes inside here. That holds the wire for the oil pressure sensor. Another shouldered bolt out the front. We've got two clean headed bolts, 6mm bolts, go inside. And then we've got some long ones. Where's the other long one? One at the back. These are the outer case bolts, and the other three go in the back here. When I put my cases together, I always use the impact. I don't crank it in, I just use it to wind the bolts in. And then the same with all the small ones. This is just winding them in to get them started, and then we'll torque them all in the correct order. So first step on bolts 1 to 6 is 24 Newton meters. And then second is 17 Newton meters. So you back them off and then go to 17 Newton meters and torque them to 60 degrees. I'll show you how to do that. The case is actually stamped in here in the tightening sequence in the correct order, so it's pretty foolproof. And go to 17. So we go back and we back each one off and go to 17. Well, this is a bit of a contraption, but it's just a cheap angle gauge. You can even do it by putting a texture mark on the head of the bolt and then just turning it to 60 degrees, like estimating it. But this is a better way to do it with a gauge. So I just got to find somewhere to get it to sit in there, get it to 0 and go to 60. Go to 60. So that's our final torque on the crankshaft bolts, and then everything else is just a torque spec. Now we go bolts 7 to 14, 24 Newton meters. And then, what did I say? 14, so, oh, and 13 and 14 is the ones that go over the, hold the output shaft. Okay, and then 15 to 27 are 10 Newton meters. Back with me old specs. 10 Newton meters. So 15, 15 and 16, 17 and 18, and then we basically go around the outside. Okay, and that's our crankcase put back together. So now I want to flip that back over and we'll just roll the engine over. Actually, while we're here, I might as well put the oil pump back in. That was the other thing I noticed. The oil pump on this, it's like brand new. There's no marks, there's no scoring, so it's like brand new. Most of the time a 10mm bolt, I mean a 6mm bolt will be 10 Newton meters, unless they're something special. Now I can flip it over. Oh, it's getting heavy again. And we can check that it all moves freely, which it does. It's a good sign. We can start putting the top end together. We've got to put the valve springs in the head. We can put the head studs and the new gasket on. I want to clean the head, so I'll do that first and then we will come back to this. So next up we're going to replace the valve springs in the head. So we need to disassemble all of this, and we want to keep everything in the same order as where it came from. So you need to have some way of laying out your valves and the springs and the buckets so that they can go back into the same position. I've just repurposed my Carrillo rod box, and as you can see I've just marked it, so I'll put my valves in there and I can put all my springs and buckets and things in the tray, and then I have a layout of how they go back in. You'll see that under these buckets that I've just pulled out here with a magnet, they've got a little shim that's actually not held in there by anything. It's just it actually fits into the top of the valve, little shim there. These are what sets your valve clearance. They come in different sizes, so you've got to make sure that they go back in. They're going to go back in exactly in the same positions as they came out of, and that they don't fall out of the buckets when you take them apart.
Have faith, believe in your source. Have faith. Have faith.
workshop manual comes in very handy. So it gives us our spec of what the OEM springs are. So the installed length on the inlet valve spring should be 34.34 millimeters, and it gives us our installed force in newtons, which we can do a conversion to get that in PSI, because the spring tester I've got is measured in PSI. So 144 to 166 for the intake in newtons, and 149 to 171. And if we can convert that over to PSI, we end up with the inlet at 32.3 to 37.3, and then the exhaust 33.5 to 38.4. So we want to increase that a bit because to allow for the boost pressure in the motor. So I'll show you how we go about doing that. So this is how we're measuring our spring tension. It's just like a makeshift thing set up in the vise here. We've got a fairly cheap spring tester. We've got it set up in the vise and the distance of our compressed height, so 34.36 or close enough. We're right on about 35 PSI, which is sort of right in the range. That's an inlet spring, by the way, right in the range of where it should be. So we'll set up one of our heavier duty springs in there. I've set up the aftermarket valve spring, and we've got our compressed height at 34.34. And if we look at the gauge, about 42 PSI. So what we had about 35 PSI, so we're about 7 PSI heavier on those springs. So that'll work. We're just trying to, we don't want to increase it too much because we don't want to overstress the valves. So just enough to keep the valves from wanting to valve float at the higher boost pressure that we're going to be using in this motor. On the stock, the 7.5 pounds that the standard kit uses, then the standard valve springs are plenty strong enough. A bit tricky to film this, but I've got I just ran the magnet over my little screwdriver here and to magnetize the end of it a bit so I can get those collets to sit in position. The trick now is to get them to stay in there while you pull the screwdriver out. Could be fun with the camera in the way. This is where you don't want to be working somewhere like I am, which has got a lot of places on the floor that are potential disaster zones for if a collet goes flying. Okay. As you can see, it's a fiddly little process, but that managed to get those to stay in position. This is a time-consuming process, so you just don't want to have to be anywhere. Okay, all right, I've done 2. I think I won't film the rest because the camera's in my way. I'll just get the rest of these put together and come back to you at the end. We've got all our collets back in, our valve springs are all in. I didn't lose any collets, which was amazing. Now we're about to put one of these shims back in. Now this is the number 4 on the inlet, and it just sits down into the top of the valve retainer like that, and then the bucket will sit down over the top of that. I might just grab a bit of oil and lubricate the edges of the bucket. So just a light smear of oil and a bit on there, and then the bucket can just drop back into position. So I've cleaned the surface, the deck surface, with some brake cleaner and a rag, and clean the head. So now we'll get our new head gasket, and it can just lay on there. I'll locate on the dowel pins. One more check of the head. That can sit straight on there. Now we can put our ARP head studs in.
Just put a bit of lubricant on each one as we drop them down into the bores. This is a specially designed lubricant to stop them from seizing on the aluminium, so don't forget to put it in, it's good stuff. Our 4mm Allen key, and wind them down into all the way until they reach the bottom, and I just snug them till they're touching the bottom. You don't have to crank on them. For the eagle-eyed among you, yes, I stuffed up. I forgot to put my cam chain guide in before I put the head on, so I've just taken it off again. Simple mistake. Anyway, no problem. I've just taken it off, and I'll put it all back together, and everything is in place now. We'll put our washers in. We need to tighten our head studs to 60 foot-pounds. I'll do it in a couple of stages. I'll just get them reasonably snug, and now we can go back and crank them up. Alright, so we've got our cams here to put in. I'll just put our other cam guide in. This one you can actually get in when the motor's together. I need to also put our cam chain back in. Get it sitting over the end of the crank there. Little bolt in here that holds this. A bit more oil on our cam. Make sure it's all plenty of oil. According to the diagram, that should be correct. With this, I don't know if you can see, but this number 1 cylinder is over this side, and the cam load needs to be pointing down, and there's a mark on both these little cams here that have to be in line with the cylinder head. I mark being for intake, I guess, lined up with the cylinder head as well. I reckon that looks about right. I'll put a bit more oil on these. And now we put our caps on, making sure they locate the cam. Now before we tighten these down, because once we tighten them down, you'll start to get load on the cams, and this can make the chain jump. So I want to actually put the cam chain tensioner in on this side. I'll have to reset the tensioner. We get a 3mm Allen key and just wind that back in while compressing the spring, and then you get to a point where that will stay like that. You can't pull this out because it'll want to spring load in. Put our gasket back on. We can just push this in, and with that compressed, it will hold the chain in the right position while we tighten the cams, and shouldn't allow it to skip. Use the screw gun to tighten these cam caps down. Or run them in so that they're close. You don't want to tighten them all the way with it, as you can see that cam starting to pull down. There is a sequence for tightening these. So according to that, we should be on our top dead center mark. With a bit of luck, we're looking at our timing mark, and we're right on.
Okay, now I shall tighten the, just torque the cam caps. These are going to be 10 Newton meters. Again, starting from the middle. I'll put this back together. Put the cover back on the side of the motor. Reinstall a plug for our inspection cap. New cam cover gasket. It's got this little piece of rubber joining the two, but I'm going to snip that. Carefully put it on without dislodging the gasket. And get our seals and our cam cover bolts. I'm not going to put the clutch cover on yet because I like to put the engine into the frame, and then I put the oil pan on once that's in the frame because it's a nice flat surface to put on my lift as it is now. So I put it on, put it in the frame, and then I'll assemble the oil pan sump and all the oil pickup when the motor's in the frame, and then I'll put a drill. We'll put some oil in the pan, and I'll put a drill on this and just prime the oil through the motor before we assemble the clutch and the drive chain for the oil pump gear, the oil pump. So we'll do all that once it's in the frame. I'm going to put some oil in the motor, and then I want to prime the oil pump. So I'm just using some Motul 3000 as the break-in oil. So I'll put a bit in. I'm not going to fill it right up, but I'll put a bit in so that the pickup will pick it up, and then I can prime it. Also, I'm going to tape up this shaft, this clutch shaft, because oil will piss out there when I prime. See if I can get it to pick up some oil. Okay, now we're pumping oil in the motor. It's going to piss out everywhere. Okay. Now I know oil has got up to the cams and all through the motor, and then I can finish putting the rest of this together. Making a bit of a mess, but I'll take this back off here. Could have put on the side stand and it'd be less of a mess, but it's no major issue. Make sure we've got our oil pump chain on. can put the bearing. We'll put the bearing in first. Bearing, our spacer. You might notice that we've got the 6-spring clutch back in there. I was going to fit the R7 style 3-spring clutch with slipper type, but I want to add a clutch plate to give me more grip. This bike is going to be making more power than the clutch is designed to hold, so I want to add a extra clutch plate. Now what I've done is I've used in the clutch pack, there's varying size, varying thickness steels. Now there's a couple of thin ones and then there's all thicker ones. I've changed them all out for all the thin ones so that I can add one extra fiber plate to the clutch. I can't do it on the 3-spring clutch because it's got this larger spline, if you like, on it that is designed to take these thinner clutch plates and thinner steel. Now I can't get, as in when I say thinner, I mean lower, like narrower. I can't get thinner ones of these, and being that they're not as wide, there's not going to be as much grip. So also I want to drag race this bike, so a normal type clutch is better for launches, smoother launches. So what I'm going to do is, anyway, go back to the 6-spring clutch, add a plate, add a fiber plate to it, and run heavy duty clutch springs. The only benefit really that the slipper type clutch gives you is when you're track riding or back into corners and you want that clutch to let go a bit. With this bike, I'm not doing that, so I'd rather have a grippy clutch so that we don't have any slip when we're making power. Just got to stake. I've tightened the nut and torqued it. We just got to stake the nut so it doesn't come loose. Our fiber's sitting in oil. We've cleaned all our steels and we can start putting the clutch together. So apparently the R7 and the MT-07 have a different ignition rotor. The timing was out and I couldn't work out why. So I've swapped that over with the other one out of the other motor and should fire up now. First go. So that was a pretty good result. We put the engine in and we've run the bike on the dyno for a while, just made sure everything bed in nicely, and then we did a low boost run at 7.5 pounds of boost and made 111 horsepower at, what's that, about 68 foot-pounds of torque. We've got the boost T on the bike, so we wound the boost up and we put 11 pounds of boost into it, and it made 133 horsepower and 78 foot-pounds of torque. At that power level, the stock injectors, it's still got the stock injectors in it, so the stock injectors are absolutely maxed out. We're going to put the MT09 injectors in next and put it onto E85. I know it's been a long video. Hopefully some of you got something out of it. If you plan on building one of these engines yourself, there might be some good pointers in there for you. It's not a difficult engine to work on, so if you're keen to have a go, then definitely, yeah, get stuck into it. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks guys, thanks for sticking around. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers.